323. 323. You got to put down your snacks and pull out a Siddur. We all, if you've been at services, you've heard 1,000 times, Adonai, Adonai, right? Okay, we do this when we take out the Torah on the festivals. Can you hear me? Or is it? Okay, good. Okay. We also sing this on the high holidays, but its primary place is really here. Read with me what it says here in the English. Adonai, Adonai, God who is merciful and compassionate, patient, abounding in love and faithfulness, assuring love for thousands of generations, forgiving iniquity, transgression, and sin, and granting pardon. Very comforting. God says, I forgive you. Now, look at the the sheet I just gave you. Let's go back to the Bible. What is this taken from? The Lord, Adonai, Adonai, a God merciful and gracious, slow to anger, abounding in steadfast love and faithfulness, extending steadfast love to the thousandth generation, forgiving iniquity, transgression, and sin, right? Same thing, basically. Yet, this is where it continues. The Lord surely does not clear the guilty, but visits the iniquity of parents upon children and children's children upon the third and fourth generations. Rabbis didn't like the second part, and so it didn't make it into the prayer book. But it's God's word. Right. So they clearly chose a specific theology to put into the prayer book very deliberately. They deliberately cut off the second half. Yes. Now, even at art school, everybody. When I say the rabbis, I'm talking about in the 900s. All right? Yes. This text that we have here that we sing over and over has become colloquially understood as the 13 attributes of God. It's taken from Exodus as is here. We sing it on the festivals. We sing it on the high holidays. The first verse, this is how the rabbis played with it. The first verse is God's self-description, his characteristics, who God is. The second verse changes. The second verse is what God does. Don't confuse what God is with what God does. The basic distinction is when you talk about love versus punishment or anger. We know God gets angry a lot in the Bible. We keep hearing that accusation. But God's essence is not anger. God's essence is love, and there are moments where God gets angry. Like parents. Yes, very much so. Who God is love. There are moments where anger emerges, just like a parent. Okay, that doesn't solve this text for us. I'm not suggesting I just solved it all, but I'm giving at least a context for it. It emphasizes that God forgives iniquity, transgression, and sin. It's like a lexicon of what could possibly be something you do wrong. There's nothing outside of this lexicon that you can do that God's not going to forgive. Okay, they want to make sure they included everything so you not think, well, if I do this, it's no longer forgivable. All right, so that's what you've got here. Let's keep going. I'm going blind. But there's a distinction here. I want to make the following. Just because God forgives does not mean that God doesn't punish. Parents forgive. Parents punish. What's that? Sometimes it's tough love, and sometimes it's more basic. But you can love your child, but you need to get the message across to them. You know what? Running in the street is not a good idea. And sometimes there are punishments that go with that to teach that lesson because it's a survival technique. Darwin would be proud. All right? So for the Bible, there is no contradiction between forgiveness and punishment. This is one of the messages you have on Rosh Hashanah, Utshuva, Utfilah, Utstakam, Ma'avirin, et Roa, Gezerah, for repentance, prayer, and good deeds. They reduce. The word ma'avirin is just so vague. It just means passes. But often translated, reduce the severity, et roa hagazera, the severity of the decree. And so, God, when we understand God in this, we have to deal with both of these different understandings of God. God is both love and anger. We understand God can be both, but at the end of the day, it's love that outweighs the rest. There are moments of anger, but love is, if on a scale, one is what God is, one is what moments of what God does. All right? And by the way, just in case you weren't sure, it's brought home by the fact that when you look at the Ten Commandments, punishment lasts 3 generations. All right, reward lasts 1,000 generations. Is there any question about which is the priority? I want to look at the idea here, excuse me, of punishing children. Most of us find this idea of punishing the generations that follow us as very difficult. Why are they suffering for my sins? By the way, just to put it in context, how many of you like the idea of zechut avot, of I want to be rewarded for the merits of my ancestors? Right? That's a basic Jewish concept. We don't punish us because Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob were good. We want the rewards of this relationship. We don't want the punishments that go with it. All right? And so there's a sort of a selfish perspective on, well, I don't like that. We want one side of the equation without the other. So, the Bible itself struggles with this, and you have with the problem of intergenerational punishment. After the first temple is destroyed, the people bemoan their fate, and they say, our fathers sin and are no more, and we bear their guilt. This is out of Eicha, Lamentations. The prophet Jeremiah looks forward to a future when people will no longer say, parents have eaten sour grapes, and children's teeth are blunted. Ezekiel goes even a step further. Look at reading number 2 here. The person who sins, only he shall die. A child shall not share the burden of a parent's guilt, nor shall a parent share the burden of a child's guilt. The righteousness of the righteous will be accounted to him alone, and the wickedness of the wicked shall be accounted to him alone. What's that? Yes, Ezekiel is talking about messianic times. Yes. Okay, we all like that one. Except we still want the merit. We still want the zechut avot. We want the merit of our ancestors. We want to be able to call upon their righteousness in our defense. Okay? Very one-sided. But there's a message here. At the core of Jewish tradition is the idea that we are responsible one for the other. There's no question in Jewish understanding, am I my brother's keeper? The answer is absolutely yes. We are responsible for the actions of those around us. We're implicated in others' deeds. We're not isolated individuals. We're connected members of families and communities. I love this phrase. I am my parent's child and my child's parent before I am my own person. Experience tells us in society that as much as we'd like to believe every generation stands on its own, it doesn't. Look, the reality is most of us spend our lives either trying to replicate what we grew up with or rejecting it. One way or another, we're responding to it. Okay? It influences. Who am I going to be like? It better not be the mailman. Okay? Okay? It better not be the mailman. We do bring that which is before us into play. When parents commit a crime, I just finished a wonderful book on this. Research indicates that the consequences of that crime reverberate for generations within the family. In other words, 25% of all crime is committed by 75% of all crime is committed by 15% of families in the United States. once it starts, it tends to continue across the generations. Because that's what you learn. 75% is committed by 15% of families. Anybody who's in legal defense will tell you there's a tendency within families to see this go on. And so it's not as neat and packaged as everybody is responsible for their own actions, and therefore, look how easy this works. Look at reading number 3. While memories themselves aren't directly encoded into genes, research suggests that significant life experiences can leave epigenetic marks on our DNA. They shift our DNA, potentially influencing the gene expression of future generations, essentially creating a form of genetic memory where certain behavioral tendencies or adaptations might be passed down through lineage, although the exact mechanisms are still being studied extensively. And it's often referred to as transgenerational epigenetic inheritance. Our behaviors in certain ways shape our DNA, and that gets coded down to our children, or as much as we don't like that fact.
There's also environment as well, because if you and that will be 3 generations.
Yes.
If you have a dysfunctional or traumatic experience as a child, you're likely to
Yep.
pass it on.
Yep. So we want to believe every person is their own, they make their own decision. That's just not true. Let me give you a perfect example culturally. I've probably even said this before. Most of us do not eat dog. Why not? Dog. Why not? They do in Asia. Why not? Eat dog. How many of you sat down when you were a child and said, let me think about this. I can eat dog. I cannot eat dog. I choose not to eat dog. How many of you made that decision consciously? Of course not. Your culture taught you what's appropriate. You never made that decision. A lot of our decisions are made for us by our parents, by our society, by those around us, without our ever having to agree to them. Another basic. How many of you think red should be go and green should be stop? Good luck driving. Just best luck to you. Not going to work out very well. Okay? Mm-hmm. And what science is saying is it's not absolutely a distinction. There's an epigenetic. So the influences of society actually affect your genetics in certain ways that get transferred to the next generation. So even though, yes, it's cultural and biological and that, okay? All of it comes together. So when we talk about the Bible's statement of punishing the children for the parents, etc., it doesn't have to be direct. It's just a strong likelihood that it's going to play out that way whether or not we like it. Now, as I said, we spend all of our lives either choosing to be like our parents or to reject what our parents did, or some combination thereof. Probably that's most of it. Okay? Both internally and externally. You're right. Absolutely. So that's Adonai, Adonai. You see the rabbi's chutzpah in cutting off half the verse very deliberately, because we're standing before God and said, don't punish us, so let's not include that second part. High holidays, we only sing half 2 verses. Okay. Turn back to 171. This you should recognize. Shema Yisrael, Echad Eloheinu, Gadol Adonai Iti. All right, we're taking out the Torah. We've gone through everything else. We're now reached the climax of this Torah service. The Chazan is standing there with the Torah in his arms. He faces the congregation. He chants his Shema. And again, this is the Torah service. What are we saying during the Torah service? Nothing to do with Torah. Hi, God. You're God, great. You're great. Here, the moment of climax of the service has nothing to do with Torah, because Torah is a placeholder for God. God's the ultimate goal. Torah is the tool.
Could it also be, God, aren't you proud of us for reading Torah now?
It sounds like a great drush. I hear a sermon in there.
If the Torah is written by the hand of God or transmitted by God, then in a sense we are connected.
Yeah, right. But it's the tool for which we have connection with God. That's what it is. But we make a distinct effort in the way in which we say this to make the point of Torah is not God. We don't worship Torah. We're taking it out. We're marching it around. But it is a symbol of God. It is not to be revered. It is to be held holy as the Word of God. But in and of itself, it has no holiness other than God's influence in it. Yes, that's exactly the point. Yes. Well said. Earlier in the service, we recited the Shema. We recited the 3 verses that went around it. We all sang Shema together. Here, it's antiphonally. There's this real sense of ceremony at this point. Cantor sings it, you confirm it. Cantor sings it, you confirm it. There's this sense of ceremony that is not just study. When we read it earlier, it was study. Here, it's ceremony. It's coronating God in the presence of the community. And just in case you think that I'm the only one saying this, Elliot Dorff says that the rabbis wanted to guarantee that we worship God, the source of the Torah, rather than the Torah itself. So you got authority behind it, not just Levine. Yes. Yeah, look, the tradition says that, yes, that they want, the words of Torah have holiness because they're meant to be God's. So the tradition says if somebody drops the Torah, you fast for 40 days. Anybody who was in my last class will realize the rabbis played with those kinds of things so that the goal is life. Obviously, you don't eat for 40 days. We're going to be going to a lot of funerals. Okay, that's just a given. All right, that's not. So what they said is, look, you eat at night, not during the day. You don't necessarily gorge yourself. You have enough to sustain yourself so that you live. But they're making the point that Torah's words are holy, and therefore there's a response to when something tragic happens and it gets dropped. Today's world, the answer is most of the time, I don't know any community does it, Orthodox or any other, if the Torah is dropped, you make donations. The kind of donation that hurts in the same way if you didn't eat for 40 days, you would hurt. All right? But you use the money to promote life in other forms. Drop the Torah? I'll let you, the rabbi will be back in April. Please visit with him and suggest it. Yes. Yes. Yeah. No, the Torah is, the only thing that makes a Torah unkosher is if some of the words get some way eroded. So a vav, which is a longer letter, the bottom of it gets eroded, it looks like a yud. That changes what the Torah is saying. And so then therefore you got to get it fixed, and then it's fine. Okay? It doesn't change the status of Torah when you drop it. It changes us. Okay. We then sing L'cha Adonai here in the English. Yours, Adonai, is the greatness, the strength, the glory, the triumph, and the splendor, for everything in heaven and earth is yours. Yours, Adonai, is the sovereignty and majesty above all. Exalt Adonai our God. Bow down before God, the Holy One. Exalt Adonai our God and bow down at God's holy mount, for Adonai our God is holy. Again, this is the first part of this right out of Chronicles. All right, this is when David's last speech, when he's saying to the people, I'm going to dedicate my wealth to the building, construction of the temple and Solomon's temple. He's using it. Even the temple itself is not holy. It's a symbol of God. The money goes to, it's all a tool. The temple is a tool to God. The Torah is a tool to God. All of those things, he doesn't mention anything. It's all about God. Don't confuse the symbols with God. We march it around because the Torah belongs to the people. It is not the possession of the priests, the rabbis, or anybody else. It is the possession of the people. We have been a very demographic society throughout our history. We have welcomed people to study texts as opposed to keeping it hidden, like many communities have done. All right, and everybody basically says, I ascribe to the words of this text when they're reaching out. Well, if you can't reach the Torah, don't have a stroke. All you're doing is, it's a symbolic action reaching the direction. It's a symbolic action. Yes?
Is that supposed to replay receiving it at Sinai?
Yeah. We're receiving it again. Not replace. It's again. It's an ongoing. It's an ongoing process of the reception of the words of Torah. Okay? Okay. Oh, yes, please. Mm-hmm. Yep. Yes. Well, it's to say we're re-accepting Torah, the experience of Sinai again. Yes. Yes. All right. In Talmudic times, each person would be called to the Torah, they would do the blessings, and they'd read their reading. That was what was expected. If you got an aliyah, it meant reading Torah. They weren't separate actions. To this day, Yemenite and Sephardic communities, that's often the case. The person who gets called up for an aliyah is expected to read the Torah. They're not separate behaviors. However, over time, people lost skills. No one wanted to embarrass anyone. Welcome, welcome. And so, and on the one hand, you don't want the Torah to be read improperly because that's unacceptable. On the other hand, you don't want to embarrass the person who's reading. And so what they did is they separated the two actions. And what happened over time is congregations and communities hired a professional to read it accurately, because its accuracy is the key here. Okay? Since the Middle Ages, the table has been on a raised platform, sometimes in the middle. And as a result, what we do has become known as an aliyah, a going up. We use the same word when we refer to going to Israel. Aliyah, we're going, Jerusalem in particular, up the hill. Okay? You're going up. So since the Middle Ages, when the Torah stand has been on some kind of raised platform, a pulpit, a beam, or whatever you want to call it, that has become known as an aliyah, as a going up to the Torah. The number of Torah readings on a given morning, this is reading number 4. The number of readings on a given morning tell you the sanctity of the day. There are differing degrees of sanctity. Weekdays, most of the time, no Torah reading. Mondays and Thursdays, fast days, Purim, Hanukkah, 3 people are called up for aliyot. Next level up, Rosh Chodesh and Chol HaMoed, middle days of the holiday. 4 are called up. Rosh Hashanah and the 3 festivals. 5 are called up. Yom Kippur, 6 are called up. And Shabbat, it's 7. And Yom Kippur and Shabbat sort of have this interplay of sometimes one takes priority and sometimes the other. But in this case, they're saying even Shabbat it stands above in terms of Kedusha than Yom Kippur. And other times we refer to Yom Kippur as the Shabbat of Shabbats. Yes and yes. There's one more. Where's there more? Well, the maftir, I'll talk about the maftir in a second. That's not really one of the aliyahs, and I'll explain that in a second. Yes. All right. So let's talk about, yes, ma'am. Right. First of all, let me give you a couple restrictions. All right, this is not how it plays out in reality, but this is what tradition teaches. Okay? First is, the most scholarly people in the community are the ones who receive the aliyahs. The assumption being that anybody who gets up there is among the most scholarly among you. And therefore, when somebody gets up and butchers the aliyah, it's like saying our rabbi is a moron. Because he can't even do that. Or the cantor's a moron, whatever you want. I'll make it the cantor to be safer. Okay? All right? Traditionally, the understanding it was given to the... Now, has that played out? Not in the least. You go to an Orthodox synagogue, oftentimes they sell the aliyahs as a fundraiser. That has nothing to do with scholarship. But that was the traditional understanding. Yes? Yeah. That has to do with whether or not it's a festival or there's something special going on above and beyond Shabbat. Okay? So, the other is traditionally, you don't have two blood relatives follow one after the other. So you wouldn't have a father and then a son doing aliyah one after the other. Why? It gives the message that the family is taking over the service. And it's meant to be a democracy, and therefore you have to go out of your way to appear that no one family has priority during a service. That is the case. That was the case in Shereth Israel in Dallas. So you could have the mother's side. If you have a bar mitzvah, the mother's side of the family had one aliyah, and the next one was from the father's side, and you found ways around it, but you wouldn't have direct connections one after the other. All right, so let me just one more thing. So with that concept, I just lost my train of thought, of equality, I'll come back to it. The Kohen and the Halevy, so in the look, that's just a recognition that for many years there was a status within Judaism. The Kohen sits at the pinnacle, the Levi as the servants of the Kohen were the next level up, and then there's the rest of us. That has gotten, most outside of the Orthodox world, that really has been dispensed with because we really don't know. I'm Levine. My grandmother remembers a Pidyon Ben in the family, which means we can't be Levis. So I'm not a Levi. Does that mean she's right? Who knows? Nobody knows. But I give her the status of Levi because she remembers a Pidyon Ben, and you don't redeem a child who's a Levi. All right? So who knows? Yeah, they come up with the genetics. Like we have the actual genetics of the Kohanim from 2,000 years ago to compare it to. Yeah, of course. Yeah, of course. Right. Right. Yeah, I'm not buying it. And so a lot of synagogues have democratized the whole process and just said it's first, it's second, it's third. Yeah. You can. Traditionally, that wasn't the case, but we've found ways of being more inclusive. Yep. Traditionally, there were no women standing there either, so that's a whole other issue, right? So there's been a lot of changes. There's been a lot of ways in which we recognize contemporary values in the way in which we serve the aliyahs, okay? There's no longer Kohen and Levi. We have women involved. We have all different. We don't necessarily worry about who's the most scholarly person. We involve everybody. All right. Let's look at this Baruch Hu et Adonai HaMevorach that we all know so well. Remember the word Baruch. Baruch means knee. It means I'm lowering myself before I'm creating a hierarchy. There's God and there's me. I'm creating hierarchy. When I say bend or blessed or praise, however you want to translate it, it's really a message of I'm reducing myself, I'm humbling myself before God. Okay? So Baruch Hu et Adonai HaMevorach. The same word Baruch Hu, this is the passive form, who is to be blessed. Praise is God who already is holy. I'm not establishing God's holiness. God is holiness, is holy, I'm just declaring it. So God is holy, who is holy. Okay? Baruch Adonai HaMevorach Li'olam Va'ed. It's the same message, just making it eternal. Li'olam Va'ed adds the sense of eternity. The congregation says that, and just in case there's any question, you always repeat the second line. Just like the cantor does, Baruch Adonai HaMevorach, the congregation says Baruch, and the cantor repeats it. That's the way of saying that when you're in a position of the leader role, the aliyah, whatever, you're still part of the community. You're echoing back that I'm part of them. I'm not in some higher status. So you always repeat the second line. All right, next. Baruch atah Adonai, praise are you Adonai, Eloheinu melech olam, our God, sovereign of the universe, Asher bachar banu, who has chosen us, mikol ha'amim, from amongst all of the amim, the peoples. All right, keep going. V'natan lanu et Torato, and gave us his Torah. What does it mean to be chosen? To be chosen means to be the recipients of Torah. Anybody can opt in. Anybody can opt into being chosen. It's not a status you're born with. Here, how do they do it? They do a Shebach Abanu Mikol. I mean, they don't even put any punctuation. I would, after who has chosen us from among all the nations, I'd put a semicolon in. And what does that mean? V'natan lanu et Torato, and gave us his Torah. That's how I'd punctuate it. Chosenness is the acceptance of Torah. It is not something inherent in being born. It's a choice that is made. You become chosen when you accept Torah. Anybody can do that. Okay. All right. But it, yeah.
Chosenness is a matter of taking responsibility, isn't it, more than anything else?
Yeah, and it's taking responsibility. Look, the reality of it is the chosen people has been chosen to suffer. That's right. One could look at it that way too. I mean, not only do we have these extra obligations, but we seem to be the recipients of the punishment for much of the world's behaviors. Okay? Chosen doesn't imply better, although there's one verse that really bothers me. There's a verse in the beginning of the festival Amidah. You have chosen us from among all the nations. V'romamtanu mikol ashanu, and raised us above. That's the one verse that just makes me uncomfortable. Right. Mordechai Kaplan said this is garbage. We're not gonna, if we don't believe it, let's not say it. There's a line in the Birkat HaMazon. He had the same response to. I was old and I was young. I've never seen a tzaddik who goes hungry. All right. Well, that's just not true. And Elliot Dorff tells the story that when he was in rabbinical school, he was singing that, and Mordechai Kaplan pulled him aside and said, "Cut that out. Do you really believe that? Then don't say it." It puts us in a bad light, but let me just say to you the following. Every demographic believes that in some way they are special. And maybe they are. Maybe everybody has their specialness. But if you're uncomfortable with this sense of being chosen, I throw in your face the following. If you don't believe in Jesus, you're going to hell. Well, tell me what that isn't chosenness, and boy, the consequences are a lot worse. All right? Every community believes on some level it has been selected, and perhaps each of us has been selected for a particular purpose. Just like every human being has a purpose. Perhaps that's the case. Our purpose is V'natan lanu et Torato, who's given us Torah, to bring Torah to the world. That's what it means to be for us to be chosen. Yeah, yes. Look, again, but we believe that we're an or goyim, we're a light unto the nations, we're supposed to bring Torah. And what does Christianity believe? Same thing. Not necessarily Torah, but it's the same message. Every community believes that they have something special to offer the world, or they wouldn't exist. And God willing, that should be the case. We'd live in a wonderful world. Right, there's a tradition that says God offered all the other nations of the world the Torah. They all said no. Got to the Jews and said, you're the last ones. By the way, I'm going to give you this choice, but I'm going to hold a mountain over your head while you make the decision. And if you don't make the right decision, plop. Okay? It's a midrash. Okay? I want to finish up with this last little sentence here, this verse, this blessing. Baruch atah Adonai, noten haTorah. The first verse was Natan, gave. Here it's noten. It's the same word, but it's present tense. Who gives Torah. That we, as we're receiving Torah, remember I said to you, it's a renewal every time. Torah is given every single day. Every day is a renewal in the life of God giving us Torah. We accept it daily. We explore it differently daily. The lens that you look at it when you're in your later years is very different than when you were 15. It's new. Because you're different. All right, let's look at the second blessing. This is when you, after you've read the Torah, Baruch atah Adonai, and humbled am I before you, Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, our God, sovereign of the universe. Asher Natan, who gave, there's that past tense, the vowels are as opposed to oa. Asher Natan lanu, who has given us Torat emet, a Torah of truth. V'chaye olam, and planted amongst us, Nata b'tochenu. An eternal life he has planted amongst us. V'chaye olam. So what is eternal life? There's another semicolon. Asher natan lanu Torat emet, who has given us a Torah of truth, semicolon, planted amongst us eternal life. Torah is the source of the eternal life of the people. Right. The first half is meant to be connected to the second half, and then it finishes with the same blessing, praised are you, noten haTorah, who gives, in the present tense, Torah. Now, the very fact that Torah reading needed to be, who says Torah reading should be surrounded by blessings? That alone elevated the process. It made it an obligation. Okay? With that in mind, however, there is a distinction between the holiness of Torah and the holiness of blessings, and I'll get that. I'll get there in a second. What I want to now do is review the process for what happens when you get an aliyah. This is not Brit Shalom, this is the larger picture. When you're called up for an aliyah to Torah, you take the most direct form, you hurry to get there. There's a communication of rushing to get there. So we move people up here, once I can identify who's there. Two, because it's a much shorter path for them to get to Torah. We don't have these processionals while somebody makes their way to the Torah and everybody goes, hi, how are you, etc. Get up there. Get up there. We're going to read Torah. It's not about you. This is about Torah. All right? The person comes up, and if anybody's ever heard me speak to one of my bar mitzvah kids, you'll hear the phrase, I'm whispering in their ear, touch, kiss, blessing. Touch, kiss, blessing. All right? You take either the fringes on your tallis, you take the strap to the Torah, you take the Siddur. You're not going to touch the Torah directly with your hand. You touch the spot where you're going to begin the reading. Touch, kiss, say the first blessing. Okay? When you say this blessing, you must not look in the Torah. You must not look in the Torah. That's why the blessings are to the side. No one should think that what you're about to say has the status of Torah. It's merely a blessing. There are degrees of holiness. And so you look away while you say, rather than give the impression that this lower status of holiness, the blessing, is in some way found in the Torah.
What about the custom, if you come up for an aliyah, that the yard is put where in a certain, but then you roll it together.
Right.
And say,
So I had this conversation with Rabbi Joel Roth years ago, and Joel Roth was the right end of our movement. He's sort of the most traditionalist end of the conservative movement. He said no. He said after you read Torah, you close it. Before you read Torah, you don't. You open it. And he says you leave it open, you look to the side so no one should think anything, but you keep it open because you want to rush into reading Torah. You don't want anything that delays that action. So you hold it, you look to the side, but then the reader can jump right in. Okay? Then when you finish reading Torah, you touch, kiss, blessing. Now you close it. And you say the second blessing. All right? And then just to communicate this message of wanting not to rush away, the person who has an aliyah stays for one more aliyah. They move to the side and stay up there. Again, you're communicating, I am not running from Torah. So you're rushing to and delaying leaving.
and then you get the pleasure of congratulating the person that's.
Yeah, there's a sense of celebrating the connection to Torah in the moment. Right. Comments, thoughts? Yeah, you could. It's another way of communicating the same thing, or not turning your back on it. Right? It's not a custom I grew up with, so it's not something I do, but yes. All right, you don't want to fall down the stairs, that's for sure. Like if you have a cane, do not turn your back. That's personal. Look, I don't happen to like that tradition. I didn't grow up with it. And so I tend not to. I don't even remember to do it. But if there's a blessing for a special occasion, we celebrate that. This is the moment. This is the community's recognition of special moments in the life of a person because, again, just like I started out, we're all one. We share in our celebrations. We share in our suffering. We are a community. It's not just your birthday. It's our birthday. It's not just your anniversary. It's our anniversary. You can bless each person who comes to the Torah too. You can do that too. And look, there's nothing wrong with it. For me, at the end of the day, the longest part of the service is the Torah service. If you look at the way our service is constructed, 45 minutes takes the preliminary and the shacharit, and the last 20 minutes is musaf, and everything else, with the exception of the sermon, is the Torah service. And it can become very ceremonial to a point of absurd, is how I see it. And so I tend not to do those things. I want to move the service along. It probably adds 10 minutes to the service. Okay, and that wouldn't be, if I was going to add 10 minutes of service, I might repeat the Musaf Amidah instead. That wouldn't be where I'd put those 10 minutes. It depends on the community. It is hit and miss, and it probably has to do with whether the rabbi is up there or I'm up there. Okay? Right, it depends on right, he doesn't always. So now let me talk about these gabayim who are up here. What is the purpose of both gabayim? What's their role? Both.
Make sure everything is read correctly.
Accuracy. There's no 1 and 2. The synagogue I moved to in Rockland County, New York, in a much more traditional community, the person who did the Mishaberachs and all the calling up was the cantor. There were 2 people standing on the 2 sides. They have no responsibility whatsoever. Their primary responsibility is to correct the Torah reading. Everything else, anybody can do. Now, in some communities, one of the customs is the person who's up there does that as well, the calling. That is not necessarily, though, their role. Their true role is to assure the accuracy of the text. Everything else is an addition. So who does it? The rabbi could sit in his chair and call them up and be perfectly fine. Right? That's not really their role. That's an extra, above and beyond. Their real role is they better be scholars because they're responsible for making sure the text is read correctly. Yes.
I also like that we've gone back to the tradition that after the person has their aliyah and a blessing is made on them, that their Hebrew name, they ask for your Hebrew name.
Right, but traditionally you actually use their Hebrew name when you call them up. It wasn't Yamod Rishon, it was Yamod Leslie Rishon. All right?
It's a good way to remember your
Right, that is correct. As Gail pointed out, there actually is one more Torah reading. All right, it's called Maftir. Maftir literally means concluder. It is the last touch of the Torah reading for the morning. 90% of the time, it is actually a review of part of the 7th Aliyah. In other words, the 7th Aliyah may have been 10 sentences. What we do for the Maftir is read the last 3 of what we just read. Hold on. Sometimes it's the whole thing. Yes. It's one of the possible understandings of it. Yes. Okay. It's not counted among the, as you heard before, it's not counted among the number of readings you do. It's an addition. And because it's usually a repetition, that's why it's not counted, by the way, Gail. It's usually a repetition. And as a result, because it's a repetition, legally it can even be read by a minor. You've read the reading already. The mitzvah has been fulfilled already. This is a repetition of it. And so it could actually, by Jewish law, be read by a minor. That tells you something about its status. That's why it's not counted among the others. Now, on holidays, we pull out a second Torah because we're going to read from a second place in the Torah. In other words, maybe in Genesis, most of the holiday readings are in Numbers. They're in Numbers 28 and 29. Okay? Most of the year, the Torah is not in Numbers 28 and 29 where we're reading the rest of the year. There's 2 options. One, we take the Torah and we roll it from wherever we are and go to Numbers, which will take 10 minutes, and the congregation has to sit there bored while you're doing that. It's called the Tirchatzi board, burden upon the community. Or you have a second Torah pre-rolled that you can just pull up and read from. That's the tradition. So when we take out two Torahs, it's generally telling you they're in 2 different places in the Torah that we're reading. That one is distinct and different for holidays. It is a special reading. That couldn't be read by a minor, because it's not a repetition. All right, let me see if I've... Hagba. There's this dramatic custom. The whole point of Hagba is this: showing the congregation Torah. Opened, script, whole congregation can look at it. Oftentimes we look at this and say, well, that just means it's somebody who can't do the blessings. We gave them the shtarka, they're big, so we gave them this and they can't do the blessings. In reality, in tradition, this was the highlight of the highlight of the highlight. What greater honor could you, when you come up for a blessing, you go touch, kiss. I'm standing there holding the Torah for them in front of the whole congregation. What could be a greater honor? This was the pinnacle of Aliyot. Now, it's good to know what you're doing. It's good to be strong because the Torah, we have actually a pretty small Torah. Maybe ours weighs 30, 35 pounds. We have the others which weigh 50, 60, and we have their Torahs that are more.
13 pounds,
No.
11 pounds.
Is it?
11 pounds.
The parchment, I don't know. I'll bring in a scale. I'll find out.
It was made specifically for using for bar buses.
Yeah, which makes sense. Yeah. Right. Like anything, it's like weightlifting. If you know what you're doing, you can lift a lot more weights. Right. You're going to use leverage to your advantage, et cetera, and there's all those kinds of things. It is important that the people who come up know what they're doing. There's a great story that Ron Wolfson describes, and I apologize if you've heard it before. He talks about the person, the Hagba, sits down, and the Galila, and someone's there standing there, and says, okay, take the tie it like this, and put the cover on, put the crown on, right on her own head. He wasn't specific in his instructions. All right? Now, I don't know if that's folklore or whatever. It probably is urban legend, but it's important that people know what they're doing in process. Take a look at reading number 5, laws regarding the Torah while it's being read. The Torah should be opened only for a minimal period of time. As soon as the reading is complete, it should be rolled up. That's mostly what you said. The Torah should be uncovered for only a minimal period. If there's any interruption between alot, any time we do a special mishaberach, we close the Torah. The parchment of the Torah should not be touched directly. Paper, when you write on paper, the ink sinks into the paper. With parchment, it sits atop. It never sinks in. And so the oils on your skin literally could cause the letters to erode. And so we go out of our way not to touch the text itself. We use a yad. Now, actually, the yad shouldn't even touch the Torah because you're worrying about scratching off a letter. Right, it's meant to be a guide as you're going. Most people touch it, and we haven't had a problem, whatever. But the goal is to cause as least damage as is possible. It also prevents, by using yad instead of your hand, it enables people around you to see it. Nothing's blocking it. The yad is very thin. So everybody can see the text around you. Nothing inappropriate may be said in front of the Torah. This seems obvious. I was the Baal Korah, I was the Torah reader in Dallas when I first got there, and Cantor and I were good friends, and he always had a joke. And sometimes they weren't appropriate jokes. And I had to reach the point where I said to him, until I'm finished reading with the Torah, don't do that to me. Like, I can't focus with that going on. All right? So while the Torah is open, kind of make sure your thoughts are directed in that direction. If the Torah is moved, it should never move unaccompanied. Now, this is something we don't do here. All right? The tradition was that the Torah, whoever's holding the Torah can't defend himself and Torah, so someone would accompany him to protect him. Now, obviously, we're not really worried about that in the synagogue, I hope. But the tradition was that when the Torah moved, someone always went with him, sort of as a guard. It's like being a secret service to the Torah. And the person, when somebody's carrying the Torah, it should not be done with just one person. There should be two. Okay. The Haftarah. The Haftarah, the word Haftarah has no connection to the word Torah at all. It's not even spelled with the same letters. Torah is a tav. Haftarah is a tet. The T is not the same letter. It rather is connected to the word maftir, which is also a tet. The maftir concludes the Torah reading. The Haftarah concludes the biblical readings. You're reading from the prophets. Both of them are concluding a section of text. There's no such thing as a Haftorah. Doesn't exist. You might say Haftorah, because it was an awe, But there's not any connection to the word Torah in any way. It's a completely different spelling. It isn't meant to be associated. Maftir and Haftarah are connected. Both mean concluder. Right, half a Torah. Right, you're not the first. So where does this Haftarah come from? In the time of Antiochus, he forbid the reading of Torah. He was trying to assimilate everybody into a common population. And I'm not suggesting he wasn't a bad guy, but his intent wasn't necessarily anti-Semitic, it was assimilation. He forbid the reading of Torah. And so what the rabbis did was substitute a section from the prophets that had some thematic link to what we would have read that morning. Okay? So if there's something about the construction of the tabernacle in the Bible, they found something in the prophets about the construction of the temple at a later point. They found a thematic link that would say to people, this is what we would have read. Remember what we would have read. From that, then comes along, we're able to read Torah again, and once something gets added to the service, God forbid, just God forbid we should cut anything out. Which is why the Rabbi Teller has made a point of saying we can do shorter haftarot, and he prefers them. It's like it's just a lengthening of the service. In a sense, it's almost a redundant act of the haftarah. Not the Torah reading, the haftarah. Yes.
But then you're hurting the feelings of the Haftarah.
They'll deal with it. They'll deal with it. So, mind you, by the way, until in its earliest stages, the person who got up to read would pick a section from the prophets and choose his own and read it. Over time, it got standardized. But the fact is, it was not standardized all over the world. And then you end up with an Ashkenazic reading. You end up with a Sephardic reading. You end up with an Ethiopian reading. What we read it was contingent upon the community in which you lived. So there already is precedent for different ways of reading the Haftarah. It's not some newfangled idea. This is the way it was throughout history. And so we've continued that process in the same way that when we went to look for a triennial reading, we didn't make it up. In Babylonia, they read the full Torah reading, the entire Sedra Vayechi. In Palestine, they read it in 3 sections. So we went back and found precedent within Jewish tradition that establishes that this is an acceptable choice. We'll do more teaching about the text and less reading of it. That was the impetus for the rabbis who suggested the triennial reading. The Haftarah has the flexibility. Now, you can't just pick any more what you want. That ruling has gone away. You have to read what's become part of the communal tradition, but how much is not necessarily, since it was initially a replacement for Torah, that has become somewhat flexible. And that's what has led Rabbi Teller has said, look, for our bar mitzvah kids, I want them to read shorter haftarot, and I want them to read more Torah. Right? I want them to read. It's a skill they're going to use a lot more. So given that choice, that this is simply a repetition anyway, I want to focus our kids on that. They can read more and more Torah. The kid who's really could do all of it. No, so right. So what I will tell you just very briefly. My approach to the kids in lessons is I don't set up litmus tests. I don't say you're supposed to read the whole Torah, because then if they read 7 out of 8, they failed. All right? Finish 1, we'll do 2. Finish 2, we'll do 3. We'll celebrate the addition as opposed to, it's like Hanukkah candles. You go from 8 to 1 or 1 to 8. You celebrate the going up. It's the same concept. Now, just as a couple of final points on this Haftarah, and then I'll let you go. I know everybody wants to go home. Number 1 is the person who's called to read the Haftarah. The rabbis wanted to make sure that you'd understood that the prophetic reading is not of the same importance as the Torah reading. The prophetic readings have one level of holiness. Torah has a higher level of holiness. And therefore, the person who chants the Haftarah must get an aliyah to the Torah. They take the maftir aliyah. The other thing to note about the Haftarah, remember I said to you it was instituted during the time of Antiochus. It's a time of suffering. The Torah is in a major key. The Haftarah is in a minor key. It's meant to convey there's somewhat of a sadness to this, that we have to do this because it replaced Torah at the time. Go ahead. All right, so the question just for those online is, when you go up to the bima, there's an expectation of kippah and talit. All right, so now, the first thing is, again, you're talking now congregationally established policy. You're not talking about tradition in any way, first of all, because women didn't get aliyahs. Women didn't wear kippot. And so you're not going to go into the Talmud and say, what does it say about a woman coming to the Torah? Because it doesn't exist. Not part of the conversation. Men in the Orthodox world, we always cover our heads, but until they're married, they didn't wear a talit. That was a symbol of knowing who's available. Okay? And so, but when you got called to the Torah, that man would put on a talit because he was going to go up and in a sense be in a status of holiness in the moment. So he'd wear a talit to touch it with the fringes, even though he's not married in that moment. So when we instituted women's participation, we've instituted that same expectation. That when you're engaged in an act of Kedusha, you put on the talit. Now, what happens in reality in our congregation? Rabbi, look, he understands that different families come from different backgrounds. There are families that are coming from a very traditional background where grandpa would have a heart attack if his granddaughter put on a talit. It would simply ruin the entire experience for him. So if a family says, look, our girl is going to have her bat mitzvah, we're not going to have her put on it, he's not going to create that sort of family tension. And so he allows it for that reason. Okay? It's a sense of family unity. At the end of the day, we have to live with one another.
But the fact that in the service, Torah service, we added the matriarchs.
Yeah, we've added them. So there are places in the text. Again, the Siddur is not Torah. The Siddur is not fixed in time. It is a man-made, unquestionably man-made document. There's no claim of divinity to this text at all. It has been open to the additional prayers. We added the prayer for the state of Israel. We added prayers as we're going along that reflect the community's concerns of the times. One of the issues in modern society is the inclusion of women. And so we've added, when we talk about Elohei Avraham, that our ancestors, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, we include Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah. Now, whether or not they would be the four women I'd list is a whole other discussion, but by doing so, we're saying we're being inclusive of women in process. You will not find that. If you go to an Orthodox synagogue, it ain't there. Okay? Right. It's in there. Imotenu is in there in parentheses, and to me, it doesn't make sense. And I've had this discussion with a lot of people. If I'm going to say avotenu can mean either fathers or ancestors, either one. It means both. If I'm going to say avotenu and then follow it up with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah, which does it mean? Ancestors, or the whole thing doesn't make sense. So why would I have to add the word imotenu? Yeah, but I've already made the point. I don't have to add an extra word when the word itself, by what follows it, is already defined. Yeah. All right. But it's in parentheses, and some people will do it. You know, I've had this discussion with Martin Kagan. He fully agrees. He says to me, yeah, Hebraically, it doesn't make sense. It's already being stated. Why would you add an extra word? By the inclusion of Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah, you know what avotenu means? Okay. You can turn it off. Thank you. And Hebrew school's coming in, so we probably have to get out of here. Thank you all. Well, 2 weeks from today, we'll meeting again on the 26th. Next week I have a bar mitzvah workshop, so I can't do both. I apologize for the cancellation.